All right, hi everybody, welcome back. We're continuing on talking about the phylum Chordata, and we're going to start talking about fish today. When we talk about chordate evolution, there are several traits that appear in the fossil record in a particular order, and those include, first we'll talk about vertebrates, then jaws with two sets of paired appendages, lungs, legs, the amniotic egg, then hair and feathers. And you might be thinking, you don't know any fish that have hair and feathers. You'd be right. So this is a list of all the chordates. So as we end towards the middle of the semester with our taxonomy with mammals and birds, that's when we'll hit those groups. So the first group is the Superclass Acrotha. A superclass is kind of like how we did subphylum before. A superclass is a group that's above class, and it allows taxonomists to have more sort of naming categories. So Superclass Acrotha, these are the jawless fish. We'll talk about two here. The first are the hagfish. These are a marine scavenger that secrete a slime on their body, and they tie themselves up in a knot, and they pull pieces of a dead fish or dead animal off when they're feeding. It also makes them kind of harder for another animal to grip that might try to eat it. They lack scales and they lack paired appendages. And so that's the first of our jawless fish. The second are what are called lampreys. These are marine and sometimes freshwater, and sometimes they migrate between them. A fish that does that is called anadromous, that is an adult in the sea but migrates to freshwater to spawn and lay eggs, of which there are several kinds of fish that do that. There's other fish that are catadromous that go the other way. They are freshwater fish as an adult, and then they migrate to the sea in order to lay eggs and that kind of thing to spawn. And an American eel is an example of that, which is not a acrotha. It's a bony fish, which we'll talk about those later. And many of the lampreys are parasites, but not all of them. That's what you can see in this picture here, where this fish is being attacked by these lampreys, and they suck the blood off of it like a parasite would do. When we talk about the evolution of jaws, which will be as we move into our next group, it's most likely that the jaws of animals, including mammals such as us, developed from gill arches that were primarily used for filter feeding fish. Jawless animal over time could change over millions of years into developing into a jawed fish like all the other ones we're going to talk about. So now we're moving on to superclass Gnathostomata. These are the jawed fish, and really all the other organisms after that, which includes mammals, and everybody else is going to fall under this superclass. So superclass Gnathostomata, jawed fish, and everything else. And the first class within that is the chondrichthyes. These are the cartilaginous fish, and the most common organism that you'll know in this group are going to be sharks, which is going to be, as you know, maybe already, PLC number 3. So, all right, so first I'm going to talk about general characteristics of the chondrichthyes, and then we're going to kind of pull that apart as we talk about different groups, and we'll remove features as they don't appear. But just to give us a good general picture of the chondrichthyes, they go back in the fossil record over 400 million years ago. They have a cartilaginous skeleton. Your vertebral column, of course, is made out of bone, but a lot of animals, that vertebral column, the chondrichthyes, stays in a cartilaginous form and does not turn into bone. And it's kind of the equivalent of the cartilage that we have on our tip of our nose there and on our ears, but it stays that way through the whole skeleton. They have placoid scales, which you can see in the picture here, and their teeth are derived from placoid scales, and so they're not fused with the jaw in sockets, kind of like our teeth, and they're replaceable. So every few days or so, depending on the shark, they're actually growing new teeth that come out on almost like a conveyor belt as they grow these new teeth. They have a very large liver, and the bony fish we'll talk about have a gas bladder that they can adjust the pressure in. Sharks and other chondrichthyes lack that. So this large fatty liver actually helps them with buoyancy. They also have a spiral valve in the intestines, which is a structure that increases the surface area and it aids in them absorbing nutrients. And they have a highly developed sensory organ called an ampullae of Lorenzini, and that is a structure that's on the face of the shark, and it is used for detecting electrical signals, and it's one of the ways they can detect animals that maybe are buried in the sand, because they can detect the electrical activity of neurons and things of that sort that are moving in the animal. The chondrichthyes have internal fertilization, and many of them have these specialized structures on their fins called claspers on the males that are used to deposit sperm. All right, let's talk a little bit about the basic external anatomy of a fish. This is really not a cartilaginous fish, but it gives us an idea of the different fins that we need to talk about. So there's some variations on this, but just to give us a starting point, fish have obviously several fins. On the top or the back of the fish, they have a dorsal fin, and many fish have two, and when they have two, they call one an anterior, which means it's closer to the head, and a posterior one, which means it's further from the head. The caudal fin is in the back. On the bottom of the fish is the anal fin, which is by the anus, and then along the side of the fish is the pectoral fin, and that is your pectoral girdle is your shoulder. So that is the pectoral fin. And then the pelvic fin sits quite often below that. And on many fish, that's moved very far forward. So you may not think of that as the pelvic region. In some fish, it's further back, but that's the pelvic fin. Not a fin, but many fish have this structure, and it's going to be important. It's called a lateral line, and the lateral line is something you can often see running down the fish. That we'll talk about more later on, but that is a sensory structure used for sensing changes in pressure, and fish use that in a variety of different ways. Let's talk a little bit about shark reproduction. And actually, these terms apply not just to sharks, but all kinds of animals. We'll talk about it here because sharks kind of cover the gamut of these depending on the species. But we have, in sharks at least, sort of three different types of reproductive strategies that can occur. Two of these you'll be familiar with. One's going to seem a little bit odd to you. So first is viviparity or viviparous. This is kind of like us, where there's a mother that basically has the baby on the inside. Baby is being fed via the placenta. Examples of this include hammerhead sharks and bull sharks. Oviparity is kind of like what a chicken does. This is where a mother deposits the eggs, basically. So a female shark deposits the eggs somewhere, kind of like what a chicken would do, and horn sharks do that. This one's going to be a little bit different for you, and it's called ovoviviparity or ovoviviparous. And tiger sharks and great white sharks do this, as do most sharks. And what happens here is there's eggs, kind of like a chicken egg sort of, but instead the eggs aren't laid. The eggs are inside the female, and they hatch basically from the inside of the female. And so the sharks give live birth, but there's eggs inside the female that are fertilized that develop in there. So you might be confused in the sense that, well, that sounds very much like viviparity. What's the difference? The difference is in viviparity, the mother shark is feeding the babies that are developing basically via a placenta. And ovoviviparity, the idea is once the egg is formed, there's really no placenta. The nutrients have to be all stored up in that fertilized egg, kind of like how a chicken egg is, but it's retained inside the mom. I'll mention this here just because we happen to be here, but then there's oviparity, which is where females lay unfertilized eggs, and then they are externally fertilized by the males. And that's what most bony fish do. So that's not what sharks do, but I mention it there because we're talking about reproduction. The oviparity is what we'll find in most of our bony fish when we get to that.